Hello everybody and welcome to my humble clinic. Today I want to check out with you one of my dearest patients, Death Note. Here we take care of patients that show symptoms or severe medical conditions of poor storytelling or non-effective writing. We try to understand what these symptoms or conditions may be, and through the understanding of them, maybe try to avoid them. Today, I want to check out with you Death Note, the film. And I'm not talking about this film.
Is this guy a friend of yours?
I'm talking about this film. This is not one of my worst patients by far, but it is one of my dearest ones, given how much I loved the anime growing up. We're not going to do a full medical diagnosis because it would cost too much and we do not have the time. Instead, we're going to check out 2 symptoms of its poor storytelling. If you enjoy these videos, please leave a like, please subscribe. You do us a great favor. We are a non-profitable organization after all. And if you wish to support this humble clinic, I'll leave the link to the Patreon down in the description. With that said, let's check out the symptoms of poor storytelling in Death Note, the film. The idea of adapting the widely successful manga anime has teased a lot of people for many years now. And although I believe a miniseries would be more apt for this kind of story, Netflix tried something that many consider almost impossible. So kudos to them for trying what many were too scared to try. The movie, though, was highly criticized by both critics and fans. Although I do not like and do not consider the opinion of critics to be reliable, they did say Joker's an empty film and that Phoenix is acting so hard you can feel the desperation throbbing in his veins. He leaves you wanting to start him a GoFundMe so he won't have to pour so much sweat into his job again. Seriously? Seriously, time? And then you even wonder why newspapers are failing to be a reliable source of information. But in the case of Death Note, you're kind of right. But not for the reasons they express in their articles. I'm not concerned of the so-called whitewashing they accuse it of, because that is not the reason it's badly written. The ethical background of characters can never be the reason why a story fails. You could write The Betrothed and have Renzo Asian, Lucia an immigrant, and it still could be a memorable piece of art. Many say because it differs too much from the original concept and that the characters aren't the characters from the manga. But this also cannot be the reason. Remember, there's a reason it's called adaptation and not copy and paste. Whenever someone clings to these arguments to prove their point, the only thing they're proven is that they do not know what they're talking about and that they're looking for anything just to be in the right. The reason Death Note fails as a story isn't because of what they all say. It fails because it's poorly written. And the first symptom of poor writing we find in this movie is
Shall we begin?
how coincidence is used in this story is our first symptom of poor storytelling. The general rule is that you're allowed 1 coincidence per movie. This is also made clear by screenwriter Robert C. Cargill. Any coincidence after that one will come across as writer convenience. Instead of flowing organically, it will feel like the writer is orchestrating everything in order to make certain things happen. When it's coincidence to bring the story forward and not the characters or the confluence of plot elements, it just feels like cheating and lazy writing. Terry Rossio, writer of Shrek and Pirates of the Caribbean, says, "One of the classic rules of coincidence is that fate, if it must be present, should always favor the antagonist. If our hero has a gun on the villain and the hero's gun jams, it's called drama. If the villain has our hero dead in his sight and the villain's gun jams, it's just called a lousy cheat, and not a very inventive way to sneak the hero out of his predicament." Also, according to director and screenwriter Alexander McKendrick, coincidence can only be used to get characters into trouble, not out of trouble. Coincidence feels dramatized when it occurs in the worst possible moment and gets the character into trouble, and is accepted by the audience if it sets the story into motion. On the other side, if the coincidence is used to help the character, it just feels like a beneficial coincidence. As a consequence, the story feels contrived. It also yanks the reader out of the story and makes them facepalm. As a writer, you're allowed only one coincidence, and it must be used to put the character into trouble. In Death Note, there are 3 coincidences in the first 10 minutes. First, the Death Note falls into the lap of light, and you might argue that it occurs in the manga as well. And yes, it does. But in the manga, the coincidence that sets the story in motion is that Light sees the Death Note fall from the sky, and has to actively be the first one to put his hands on the Death Note. In the movie, it falls at his feet, not demanding any kind of active action from the main character. Pretty convenient, if you ask me. The second coincidence happens when Light is in detention. The teacher just conveniently leaves the room, allowing Ryuk to appear and bring the story forward and explain the rules of the Death Note itself.
Oh, hi, I'm awake. I was just like a tree or a plant or something.
I'm heading out for a moment. Don't fall asleep, or it adds another day.
And right after the second coincidence, a third one happens. As Ryuk explains the rules, 2 teenagers are conveniently bullying a girl in a cliché way under Light's eyes, so that he can experiment the book, prove that it works, and go forward with the story.
There's no need to stop it. Who?
Sorry, what else is there?
How?
Better solutions could have been found, solutions brought forward proactively by characters and their own desires. By using such coincidences instead, a writer yanks the reader out of the story and makes them facepalm before the film reaches the 12th minute mark. This leads me to the second symptom of poor writing that I want to check out with you. Although the ball seems to get rolling by the midpoint of the story, the climax in Death Note just doesn't feel like a climax. It ends at minute 85, and the last 10 minutes of the denouement are dedicated to explain the climax and open the story to a sequel. Those whole 10 minutes of explanation really kill the tension and do not draw interest for a second movie. There also seems to be a confusion between the definition of catharsis and denouement. But before we enter the climax argument, I would like to take an extract of the importance of change from John Yorke's book Into the Woods, which also gives the name to the other column, Into the Woods. All essence of drama is built on change and the internal struggle a character must undergo in order to achieve it. They learn the quality they need to achieve their goal. Change is thus linked to dramatic desire. If a character wants something, they're going to have to change to get it. At the same time, the climax is also, for the main character, the final showdown with the antagonist, the battle in which they engage with their dramatic need and overcome their flaw. The climax is also linked to the inciting incident, which provokes the question that will be answered in the climax. It arouses the antagonist and the forces continue in size until the protagonist and the antagonist slug it out. It's the point to which all the drama builds to. Let's see how this applies to Death Note. Light, high school student whose mother's murder has not found justice, is given a book of death. And after he realizes the book actually works, he kills the murderer of his mother thanks to the Death Note, obtaining his long-awaited revenge. Now driven by lust for power, the young Light proclaims himself as God of Justice. After this, the Justice of Men, represented by L, steps up and challenges Light's new self-proclaimed position. Who will win, the God of Justice or justice made by men? The unsaid question is a tyrannical justice better, or is a democratic justice the best way to judge sins? Through examples of one and the other, the two fight it out, and the winner at the end will represent the theme of the story, which in the manga is, of course, a democratic justice is a better way to conduct manners than a tyrannical justice. Given the setup of this story, the only obvious climax should have been a final showdown between Light and L, which doesn't happen though. The climax is L against his love interest, Mia, for the possession of the Death Note. There seems to be an inconsistency between how the story sets up and how it ends. Mia versus Light could have been one of the conflicts, but is in no way set up to be the climax. After the showdown between Light and Mia, the story ends without concluding the conflict between L and Light, the should-be climax, leaving the story open to a sequel. It's like if at the end of Episode 6, Star Wars, the final showdown at the climax was Luke versus the Emperor instead of Luke versus Vader. And although it may make sense that to defeat the Empire, one must defeat the Emperor, the setup of the story was made in a way to have Luke versus Vader at the climax instead of Luke versus the Emperor. And if despite this setup we had Luke versus the Emperor as the climax, you may understand why the audience would feel cheated at the end of the movie and would leave the theater quite disappointed because of this inconsistency. But if we were to accept the fact that during the climax, Light's ultimate enemy was Mia and not L, Light wins the match and wins the Death Note. By doing so, he obtains what he wanted and not what he truly needed. He embraces his dark side and pays the price for it by losing his loved ones. But does he lose his loved ones? He does lose Mia because it was either her or the Death Note, but he does not lose his father, which is his only family. It only makes sense that if Light does descend into his dark side, which is the change he chooses to go through, he should lose his father, but he doesn't. So not only he obtains what he wants, but he doesn't pay a price for it. Either this is bad writing or there's no change in Light, which is also bad writing. At the end, Light maybe changes into a tyrant, wins, does not pay a price for his win, and his conflict with L, which was the setup for the climax, finishes unresolved. You do understand why the audience hated this movie and felt cheated during the watch. Even if the story was planned to have a sequel and this shouldn't have been the climax of the overall story, this film should have had an ending with change and consequences to that change. This to have a sense of conclusion and satisfaction for the viewer, especially if there isn't the certainty that a sequel will ever be created.
Do you think that I'm crazy?
If anything, I think you're not crazy enough. We could change the world.
We? Like we as as in us?
So these are the symptoms that I wanted to share with you today, even if there's much more we could talk about this particular film, such as how scenes are constructed or the structuring of fundamental beats, but I still cannot afford long videos for now. Maybe in a near future I can afford longer and more robust videos. If you wish to support this humble clinic and our work, you can find a link to our Patreon down in the description. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe, please leave a like. Your support is highly appreciated. Thank you for watching and thank you for visiting.